Good evening. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. My name is Dr. Ryan Pemberton, and I am humbled to be the director of the Wilson Center for Leadership in the Public Interest. When General Sam Wilson was elected president in the summer of 1992, he said the following. He said, "The single most important person on this campus is the student, followed closely thereafter by the faculty and staff who serve as his mentor. The single most important thing that happens on this campus is that colloquy that happens between student and mentor. All else is secondary and supporting." Tonight, we have two of the finest professors Hampden-Sydney has been lucky to call their own. Dr. Ron Heinemann, professor of history, and Dr. David Marion, professor of government and foreign relations. Dr. Marion was also the founder of the James Madison Center, the precursor to the Wilson Center for Leadership in the Public Interest. These two fine gentlemen have given 94 years of collective service to Hampden-Sydney College. I'll say that one more time, 94 years of service to the college. What is more important than that time is the number of good men and good citizens they have mentored, guided, and educated. So we're so honored, so thrilled that they are here with us tonight to discuss the merits of our current Electoral College. This particular topic is exceptionally timely, it's relevant, and this is one that we've actually been debating for decades now. So we are absolutely thrilled and thankful to have them here this evening. We trust that y'all will enjoy this civil and very important discourse. With that being said, this is how the evening will work. Dr. Heinemann, who will be taking the position that our Electoral College needs to be reformed, will go first. He will speak for roughly 15 minutes. Dr. Marion, then, believing that the Electoral College should be, is solid the way it is, will then provide his thoughts for roughly 15 minutes. They will then ask, Dr. Heinemann will then ask Dr. Marion questions, and then Dr. Marion will ask Dr. Heinemann questions. We will then you will then have the opportunity to send in by chat your particular question. So all of our alumni, parents, and friends out there, thank you for joining us. Please send in your chat questions, and we look forward to hearing from you. This promises to be a wonderful evening. So again, Dr. Heinemann, Dr. Marion, thank you. With that being said, Dr. Heinemann, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ryan. I am not 94 years old, but I have been involved in these debates on the campus for a number of years. I know very frequently I used to debate the co-education question with Professor Brinkley, the end of which I would always tell John that I won the debate, but he would say, yes, but I won the wars. Dr. Marion and I have debated this subject before in a less controversial time. But since the last time we debated the Electoral College, we've had two elections in 2000 and 2016, when the loser received more votes than the winner, making the discussion in this election year more relevant than ever before, because this could happen again. We're confronted with a system by which we select the president, the Electoral College, whereby the winner is determined by a majority of the vote of the electors from each state. That number determined by the total of each state's congressman plus its two senators. So you have a total of 538 votes. To win, you must get 270 plus delegates or electors. Now, I submit that this system is archaic, cumbersome, undemocratic, and potentially dangerous. One of these times we will get a result when the American people will have a hard time swallowing it, one that will create a constitutional crisis. Indeed, that has already happened, but we will be less tolerant today than formerly about accepting this. In 58 previous presidential elections, on 5 occasions, the winner in this process did not receive the most votes. On other occasions, the results were so close that the shift of a few thousand votes would have changed the Electoral College results and left the popular vote winner the loser. Has this been a devastating effect on American political life? To this point, no. Did the results give us a lesser president in the process? Sometimes. Andrew Jackson was a better president than John Quincy Adams. Not a better man, but a better president. With regard to the debate over Cleveland versus Harrison, that indeed is a toss-up as to who was worse or who was better. But with Bush 2, we got the Iraq War, and with Donald Trump, we have chaos. This is an unfair system. I don't know about you, but I think the winner should be the person who gets the most votes. It's called democracy, or majority rule, or fair play. Why have an election at all if the person with the most votes loses? Can you think of another system where that indeed is the case? All our other elected officials at the national level, Congress, the Senate, at the state level as well, the winner with the person with the most votes is the winner. Not, however, sometimes at the presidential level. There seems to be some mistrust on the part of founders anyway regarding the voters. And there's a desire perhaps to obstruct their will to prevent, quote, mob rule. This is called tyranny, or oligarchy, or aristocracy, or minority rule, but it is not democracy. Now, it is said that the United States is not a pure democracy, but a representative democracy, a republic. And that is true. But even in a republic, officials are elected by the people. And we have been getting more democratic over the centuries, expanding the right to vote to minorities, to women, to 18-year-olds, and even changing the election of senators from state legislatures as a source to the people having a say, the 17th Amendment. It is time to ensure that our presidential election, like all other national and state elections, reflects this popular will. The controversy over this institution is related to the closeness of elections and the unfairness of the present arrangement. Since the beginning, over 500 proposals have been offered to change the way we elect our president, but they have all failed because there has been no agreement upon a successor plan. And so the system has muddled along without any disaster until now. Much of the defense of the Electoral College, and you will hear this position from Dr. Marion, this has to do with its association with the founding of America. It is old. It is very traditional. It is the brainchild of wise founding fathers whose intentions we should never question. Well, this institution was not made in heaven. It is the product of a compromise between elitists and populists among the founding fathers. Those who feared mob rule, tumult and disorder, said one, and those who wanted the Senate to elect the electors from esteemed citizens, who in Alexander Hamilton's words, were people preeminent in ability and virtue and free from foreign influence, as opposed to those people, again, who wanted to let the people do the selecting. The founders also wanted to balance off the competing interests of the small and large states by population, and also those with large slave populations, to ensure that the Constitution would be ratified. In other words, this was one of their primary goals, to get the Constitution accepted, and in order to do that, they had to compromise. They haggled over the mechanism for electing a president and came up with what I call a Rube Goldberg device known as the Electoral College. And then 17 years later, they changed it with the 12th Amendment because of a major flaw in that design that nearly cost us Thomas Jefferson's presidency. So set aside the notion that this is some creation of perfection. It doesn't even work the way they thought it should. What we have instead are corrupt bargains, 1824, special commissions, 1876, and Supreme Court justices, 2000, who have often determined the results, not the people. The people of ability and virtue have not always been selected as electors. State interests between small and large states have not been balanced through the Electoral College. And political parties, unknown in 1787, have emerged to control this process. A real negative, I think, in today's highly charged partisan politics. A process that looks simple is highly complicated and open to a panoply of unpredictable possibilities. And why should a minority of voters, because that's what happens if the person with the least number of votes through the Electoral College somehow wins, why should a minority of voters have preference here? Do we trust the minority over the majority? You know, you can have minority mob rule with guns in hand as easily as majority mob rule. Furthermore, we have a system that rewards states, not the people. And minorities, they will remain protected as they are in the Senate through presidential vetoes and through constitutional checks and the checks and balance system. So let's look at the major undemocratic features, or beyond the undemocratic features, the major flaws of the Electoral College. There are three that I will point out. The first of these is called the Faithless Elector. The electors, and they are not determined by the Constitution, they are determined by state legislatures. These people are usually party loyalists, sometimes they are called hacks, not the esteemed wise men that Hamilton preferred. They usually vote in favor of their own party's nominee, but there's no guarantee of that. And there are many instances of these electors voting for other folks who didn't even run for president. They are independent voters, and attempts to penalize them for voting beyond their instructions have proved folly. Think of the enormous pressure on these people if the electoral count is close, when changing a handful of electors could change the result, perhaps through bribery or promises, not unknown in American politics, or because of philosophical differences with the party nominee, which was often the case with Southern electors in the massive resistance years. In the extremely close election of 1960 between Richard Nixon and John Kennedy, independent electors in Mississippi and Alabama cast their votes for my beloved Harry Byrd of Virginia, who was not even on the ballot. On the morning after the election, with Kennedy's margin shrinking, the White House called Byrd to see if Mississippi's independent electors would remain uncommitted for a while. Assurances were given that that could be arranged. So, electors can make a mess of the situation. The system also sets itself up for manipulation by third-party candidates or these independent electors who hope to throw the election into the House of Representatives, where they can horse trade for power and influence. That is playing with the will of the people. The second feature, and perhaps the most harmful aspect of the Electoral College, is the winner-take-all aspect of the system. All of a state's electoral votes go to whomever takes the state, no matter how small the margin of victory. And this produces a very unfair representation of the vote, especially if third-party candidates are involved. Think of acquiring 49% of the vote in one state. The victor has 51%. The 49% gets no representation, no consideration in the Electoral College. You could lose by 10,000 votes in California and win by 500,000 in Virginia. Therefore, you would be ahead by 490,000 votes, yet you would be down by 40 electoral votes. This, of course, makes voters in the big electoral states more important than the rest of us. Founders did not like that idea. Indeed, they were trying to balance the interests of small states against the big states. And what the Electoral College has done is given greater preference to the larger states and their larger populations. We sometimes call this the beauty of federalism. Madison did not conceive of this possibility, hoping that each district would provide its own elector, but that It does not evolve that way at all. And one must understand that with regard to the application of the Electoral College, evolution has been the rule of the game. Another feature of winner-take-all is its negative aspect or impact on voting. In states where the election of one candidate is assured, there is no reason for the opposition to turn out, a most undemocratic feature. Why should Republicans go to the polls in New York knowing that they will not win that state? Gets worse if you have a strong regional candidate. A campaigning candidate can ignore an entire region knowing that he or she cannot win there, as the South was ignored in presidential politics for many years after the Civil War. The system discourages voting. But if you knew your vote was equal to everyone else's in the country, the incentive to vote would remain high. If everyone's vote counted, politicians would have to go after all of them. Changing to a popular vote would also be a blow against election night forecasts of victory by pollsters who quickly total up the electoral votes and declare a winner. When every vote counts, no such clear forecast could be made until most of the votes were in, and West Coast voters would retain incentives to continue to vote. Furthermore, a new problem with the system is that some states are now turning to proportional representation, assigning some electoral votes according to the vote of their congressional districts, giving us new kinds of inequalities. So far, only Maine and Nebraska have done this, since no large state wants to give up its electoral significance. Very simply, in our current system, some votes are worth more than others or will be counted differently. The third largely negative factor of the Electoral College is something called the contingency election, a most farcical feature of this system. If no candidate wins a majority of the college, the election is then pushed into the House of Representatives, where all kinds of kinky possibilities arise. Each state has one vote determined by the vote of its congressional delegation. In other words, Delaware, with its 1 million people, will have the same impact as New York's 20 million people. The party in control of the House at that point could elect its own candidate, even if he or she had run third in the popular vote. Or a minority in the House could win if it controlled a majority of the states, which is the case right now. In the House of Representatives, Republicans are in a minority, but they have a superiority of 26 states. So they could determine the outcome even though they are in the minority. The possibility of all kinds of deals here is infinite. Would a congressman decide based on who won his district, his state, based on party allegiance or philosophy? Or in the case of Stephen Van Rensselaer of New York in 1824, by prayer? The story goes that Jackson and John Quincy Adams were tied in the consideration of the House of the vote in the House of Representatives. Several ballots were taken. Van Rensselaer tried to decide who he was going to vote for. He prayed to his Lord for guidance. When he opened his eyes, he saw on the floor in front of him a ballot for Adams. He cast the ballot for Adams, and John Quincy Adams was elected our president. So that is another explanation for how our presidents come to be selected. I believe there are enough flaws in this system to warrant a change. I recommend going to a straight popular vote or direct election. The person with the most votes wins, with 50% required for victory. If no one receives 50%, a runoff a month later would determine a victor. An acceptable alternative would be to establish a base of 40 or 45% required for victory. No winner requires a runoff. Simple, fair, and democratic. To conclude, the reasons to change this system, to find some more desirable option. One, it would guarantee the winner of a popular vote would be elected. All votes would count equally. A contingency election, the runoff would be in the hands of the people, not the House of Representatives. It would eliminate the faithless elector. It would reduce potential fraud. and it would stimulate voter interest and participation. With that, I rest my case and turn it over to Dr. Marion.
Ron, thank you. And let me thank all of those of you who have tuned in this evening to listen to at least one old fogey. Ron has done well to preserve himself over the 50 years that he has been at Hampden-Sydney. He has given an awful lot to this college. On the other hand, age has caught up to me. So I'm going to recommend that you have modest expectations. It's always easier to deal with an audience with modest expectations. I am not going to argue that the Electoral College system is perfect. I am not going to argue that it is near perfect. I am going to argue that it is preferable to the alternative that has been set out by Professor Heinemann, and that it is eminently defensible. As you will discover, my principal argument in defense of the Electoral College is a cultural argument. Now, let me concede that to listen to a growing number of political commentators, I'm about to defend the indefensible. I apparently can't see the writing on the wall or read tea leaves very well, or I need a new crystal ball. Just look at the signals coming out of a growing number of states that are actually willing to give away their electoral votes, including, by the way, New York and California, very large states. How is it possible to offer a rational defense of an electoral system that has come in for withering criticism from the mainstream media and the education establishment, two of the principal shapers of public opinion? As you will discover, I am contra culture when it comes to the Electoral College and many other things as well, as I believe that it is possible to offer what I will call, for purposes of argumentation, a backdoor defense of the Electoral College by showing not that it is a perfect system or even an almost perfect system, but that it is better than the likely alternative, electing a president with a single nationwide popular vote, the so-called national popular vote option championed by the New York Times. I also will offer what I am going to call a front door defense of the Electoral College once I dispense with the backdoor defense. One more preliminary observation, and I will jump into my defense of what I'm going to call here the EC, not the European Community, but the Electoral College. You will notice that the most important part of my defense rests on cultural arguments. I make a point of telling students that our job at Hampden-Sydney is to assist them in learning how to think about important subjects, about justice and courage and prudence, and subjects such as separation of powers, federalism, immigration, education, property rights, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, among many other subjects. Learning how to think intelligently about subjects important to human beings requires that we understand the critical importance of culture to human existence. If we had forgotten how important culture is, then we surely should have been reminded by the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And so I will finally rest my defense of the Electoral College on a cultural argument. Now to the backdoor defense of the EC in my response to the national popular vote option. Under this system, as you well know, and as Professor Heinemann has very nicely described for us, the popular vote winner, either the winner of a majority of the popular vote or a plurality, becomes president. If a majority of the popular vote is required to become president, then there would have to be a provision for runoff elections. This would not be necessary if the crown goes to the plurality winner, but presumably we would not be content to have someone who garners, say, only 25% of the vote becoming president. So even if we are prepared to accept a plurality winner, there would have to be some sort of provision for runoff elections. Either arrangement would encourage the appearance of many special interest parties. Let me make two observations at this point about the national popular vote alternative and the prospects for having what I will call a quality republic. And then I will proceed to my frontal defense of the Electoral College. The Electoral College requires a candidate to win a majority of the electoral votes to become president. And this is the principal reason why we have a two-party system. Does anyone really believe that the next president will not be the Republican Party nominee or the Democratic Party nominee? Did anyone really believe that the winner in 2016 was going to be someone other than Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump? The Electoral College requires then that parties be big tents that include a multitude of people with diverse interests. And this requires that parties not stray too far to the right or to the left. Biden has given voice to this fact in his rejection of Medicare for all and the Green New Deal on the grounds that they are too radical for the American electorate. He also has repeatedly asserted that he is no socialist. He does not believe that Americans want to live in a socialist country. Biden's desire to be seen as a moderate and not, say, as a left-leaning extremist is in line with Madison's defense of coalitional or moderate politics in Federalist Paper 10, the kind of politics that Madison believed the federative republic intended by the Constitution would nurture. The national popular vote option, because it increases the likelihood of runoff elections or second elections, would incentivize proponents of special interest parties and nurture the factious divisions and factious politics that Madison feared would be the undoing of decent and competent democracy in the United States. The first round quickly would become an opportunity for Americans to make a statement about issues that play to their emotions, say abortion, or the environment, or free markets, or property rights. They would be given an opportunity to express, in other words, factious impulses, something that Madison wanted to discourage, not encourage, for good reason. The second observation about the national popular vote option also has to do with having a quality republic. The Electoral College system works to confer an appearance of legitimacy even if candidates do not receive a majority of the popular vote. Bill Clinton received approximately 45% of the popular vote in 1992, but he received a majority of the electoral votes. And no one questioned whether he was a legitimate president. He was the majority winner. Perhaps not the winner of the majority of the popular votes, but he did win the majority of the electoral votes. And that was sufficient to confer legitimacy in everyone's eyes. Well, enough for the backdoor defense of the Electoral College, defense based upon the problems with the principal alternative that is out there. Now for the front door defense. I will make three arguments, and all will have to be outlined or summarized briefly. A democracy argument, a constitutional argument, and finally a cultural argument. Let me quickly dispense with the attack on the Electoral College for being undemocratic. To be blunt, it is not undemocratic. It is democratic, but democratic at the state level. In short, while it is not nationally democratic, if to be nationally democratic you mean that the national popular vote winner necessarily becomes president, but it is federally democratic, since the popular vote winner in each state traditionally has received that state's electoral votes. Who received all the electoral votes in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin in 2016? The answer is Donald Trump. by virtue of the fact that he was the popular vote winner in those states. And that is democratic. On to the constitutional argument. Let's remember that the Constitution did not create a national republic or a purely democratic system of government. It created a federalistic republic that was not purely democratic. And that Constitution remains our Constitution, today's Constitution. The Constitution divides power horizontally and vertically. That is, power is divided among governments and within governments. Why did we do this? We did this to check the threat of tyrannical government, but also to increase the likelihood of competent government. States and localities were expected to be important actors within this system. The Electoral College fits nicely with the logic of the Constitution, and we might even say the wisdom of the Constitution. The Electoral College reminds us every 4 years that states are important. In fact, they are very important. At a time when the culture seems to be pushing us in the direction of more and more centralization and nationalization, when candidates for the presidency are unembarrassed to argue for federal programs that guarantee health care for all, child care for all, free college for all, and when something like the COVID-19 pandemic comes along with its nationalizing and centralizing bias, and national security threats are increasingly arising with their nationalizing and centralizing bias, and when an increasing number of Americans are calling for the nationalization of every conceivable right, and when the dominant cultural forces are emphasizing raw national power over constitutionalism or constitutional power, it is especially beneficial to have something like the Electoral College there to remind us that the states are important and should be treated as the serious governmental entities that they were intended to be in our constitutional republic. The Electoral College makes a statement about the states and their significance in our constitutional system, and it is a statement of considerable cultural importance. Ask any foreign observer of the 2016 presidential election whether states are important in America. Why is protecting the American Federalist Republic so important? Well, let's quickly proceed to the cultural defense of the Electoral College. And for this argument, I'm going to call on Alexis de Tocqueville as my expert witness. De Tocqueville, author of what is still the most incisive study of democracy in America, argued that freedom and civilization are protected in America largely due to the federalistic structure of the constitutional system, and especially to the shaping and nurturing of citizens that goes on in the multitude of small communities that have been incorporated by the states. Local self-government teaches citizens to bargain and form coalitions. It teaches them that self-governance is complicated and difficult. It teaches people to accept defeat and celebrate victories with civility. And it nurtures habits essential to production, commerce, as well as service and charity. Extensive communal interaction means citizens are compelled to come face to face with the happiness enjoyed by their neighbors, as well as the tragedies that are an inescapable part of human existence. The lifestyle of a free people, to borrow a phrase often associated with old age, is not for sissies. Both Madison and Tocqueville understood that serious work is required to nurture citizens who are up to the job of thoughtful self-government and who have the knowledge and discipline to deal rationally with the tragic side of human existence. Self-conscious citizens need to be nurtured, and Madison understood that such nurturing is best done locally. In fact, the national government is just not equipped for this job. Hence Madison's defense of a federative republic that divides power among national, state, and local governments. There are good reasons why the Constitution entrusts the states and their local subdivisions with the so-called police powers, or the authority to oversee the health, the morals, the safety, and the welfare of the people. To master the skills and knowledge associated with responsible self-government, people need to take local self-government seriously. And this requires that localities and states possess substantial powers to tackle important responsibilities, and that they be recognized as important actors in our constitutional system. Indeed, the best hope of keeping human freedom alive in the United States, and thus preserving the conditions required for genuine human flourishing, is to keep our federalistic system healthy and strong, and to resist the cultural movement in the direction of a national republic that will be fertile soil for the kind of soft despotism and enervation of the human spirit and the human soul that Tocqueville identified as the great threat to be feared in democratic times. And there is considerable evidence that soft despotism is knocking on our door as we meet this evening. To be sure, leading founders understood the significant benefits of having a national government with powers equal to significant national responsibilities, declaring war, negotiating treaties, managing international commerce, among other responsibilities. The national government at the time of the founding was under the real threat of being overwhelmed by the states. The challenge today is to contain nationalist impulses that threaten to overwhelm the states and localities. Witness, indeed, the increasing attacks on the Federalist Electoral College. One last observation. Founders like Madison understood that legitimacy has to be about more than consent or raw power, even the power and the consent of the majority. It has to be about justice if we to have a quality democratic republic. This is also the teaching of the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson understood that it was not enough for the American people to want to be free of British rule, or even to possess the power to assert their independence. The American people had to convince all mankind that they understood that a government is only legitimate if it protects the fundamental liberties of the people. And they also had to convince all mankind that they were up to the job of giving themselves such a government and preserving such a government, which means that they had to know how to assess whether a government really is protecting their fundamental liberties. Only such a people will be up to the job of rational self-government. Only such a people will be rationally free and know how to ensure that they live in a nation committed to rational freedom. Citizens who are up to doing this must be nurtured, and a national republic cannot nurture such citizens. In short, democratic consent, even if it is the consent of a national majority, alone will not get you a quality republic, will not get you a rationally free nation, or serve as fertile soil for a culture that nurtures rationally free human beings. Let us never forget that in America, legitimacy is about more than consent. It is about justice, and justice is about the protection of fundamental rights, about human freedom, and about the conditions required for genuine human flourishing. And it is for this reason, guided by what Publius calls the new science of politics in Federalist Number 9, that the founders opted for a Federalist Republic. Not the only reason, but the most important, theoretical reason for their choice. So is the Electoral College undemocratic or anti-democratic? No. Is the Electoral College at odds with the logic and wisdom of the Constitution? No. Does the Electoral College provide needed support for our federalist system, a system that is good for freedom and civilized existence at a time when that system is being systematically weakened? And the answer is yes. I hope that you will lend your support, and there are many ways to do so, to the current movement to protect the integrity, the vitality, and the respectability of Madison's constitutional republic. A republic that is not perfect, that never was perfect, and then nothing perfect can be expected of imperfect, flawed, and fallible human beings, but a republic that has been exceptionally beneficial for generations of Americans, irrespective of their racial, ethnic, or religious backgrounds and affiliations. And Ron, you can have at me. I'm not sure that I'm going to persuade you with my responses, but have at me.
I believe I am a 21st century individual, while David, however, lives in the 18th and 19th century. His sources are founding fathers who were brilliant men for their own time, and did indeed design a system of government, a federal system of government that has stood the test of time. But they failed miserably in the selection process by which the national leader would be selected. Tocqueville's observations of America in the 1830s are incredibly insightful. I've long believed him to be the outstanding analyzer of the American system, the American culture, but that culture has changed dramatically in the last century, and we must live with what we have today. Federalism is a system by which the government of the United States shall operate. It is supposed to help in the sharing of power, in preventing the abuses of power, especially by a federal government. And I think it should continue to serve that function. But that has absolutely nothing to do with the selection of the leader of that federal government. That does not have to be a federal component at all. The one aspect of federalism in that system is that it gives some authority to the states. And I think by what has happened with regard to the growth of this nation, more and more power has flowed to the larger states, who indeed now dominate the electoral process, I think unfairly to the interests of those who do not live in those larger states. There is no reason why we cannot have a national concept of self-government represented in the selection of the one national leader. To deny that to the people is indeed undemocratic. That's my initial response, David.
Oh, okay, so no question, a response. You heard the argument, obviously, that I made with regard to democracy. We are a republic. Consent in America does not confer in and of itself legitimacy. That is an important lesson we have forgotten. And part of the problem that we have, and some of the difficulties that Dr. Heinemann has identified, are associated with our failure to see that the American people are soundly educated with regard to the nature and character of our Constitution and the reasoning behind that Constitution. We have fallen down on that job. So if there is a problem with the people not accepting the results of the Electoral College, that is not necessarily a problem with the Electoral College. That may well be an educational problem. A problem that we need to address by improving the quality of civic education in this country. And again, that education has to be about not only the mechanisms that we rely on for governance, but the reasoning behind those mechanisms. Let me give you just one example. And it goes back to this issue of legitimacy. The legitimacy isn't simply about consent. Why is the Declaration of Independence so long? The Declaration of Independence is so long because Jefferson understood that consent alone is not enough to confer legitimacy. The American people had to demonstrate to all mankind that we were up to the job of self-government, that we understood what it was that a decent government should do for people. We needed to demonstrate to all mankind that we understood what it means to live in a quality republic, a republic that is committed to protecting the conditions for human flourishing. And incidentally, you say I live in the 18th century or the 19th century. I live in the 21st century. I am assuming that all Americans are interested in flourishing, in human flourishing, in good, in what is good for themselves, for their spirit, for their souls. And the argument for the Constitution is an argument that goes to the souls of human beings. And so the weight that I have attached to the nourishment of citizens, how do you get citizens who understand what it is that we should all be looking for in a democratic republic, and then are up to the job of securing that, of making that happen? That can't be done by a national government. And you talk about protecting the federal system, but getting rid of the Electoral College. The Electoral College is one of the last major things that we have that makes it clear to everyone that the states really, really, really are important. We have undermined so much else that is related to the American federal system, to unfunded mandates, all kinds of federal preemption. The Electoral College is one thing that is left that sends that signal that the states are important. Now, you need to know why. You need to know what is supposed to go on in those states, in the localities within those states. What needs to go on when it comes to creating a democratic citizenry in a republic such as ours. Well, much more that I can add to that question, but the whole issue of legitimacy has been simplified. I'm going to go on one more point. I shouldn't monopolize here. But again, a telling point, and in line with, I think, Dr. Heinemann's view of what it means to live in the 21st century. If there is a coup d'etat in Nicaragua, in El Salvador, what is the question that the State Department will ask, and that most Americans today will ask? Does that government have the support of the people? Constitutional Americans understand that is not enough. We need to ask more than that. We need to ask whether that new government is committed to protecting the fundamental rights and liberties of the people of that country, and are the people of that country ready to give themselves that government. It is a matter of more than merely consent. We have simplified today. We have imparted too much weight to mere consent. I don't know whether we go to questions now or Ron gets to respond. Do you have any more questions?
Is there a concept of national self-government, David? I would argue that the failure to allow a popular mandate, a vote reflecting the majority of the people, undermines that concept of self-government. It really does risk the adherence of the citizenry, those who have won the majority of the vote, their adherence to that system. I think the election here is very much apart from all of the privileges and requirements that you are placing there for the citizenry of the country to follow. But the election of a president does not affect that in any way. Indeed, it might undermine it if the Electoral College continues to be in existence. I believe, I'll just put this out, it gets very contemporary. I believe that another Trump victory through the Electoral College would be disastrous for the country. How can you indeed justify the continuation of a process when the loser has 3 million more votes than the winner through the Electoral College? Trump would lack legitimacy. He would be wounded in his capacity to govern, especially if Democrats control Congress. This country would be consumed with bitter political fighting. Indeed, another impeachment trial might be in the offing. I don't think secession would be in the cards, but I believe you might have a movement back towards some sort of confederation system as people try to find a system whereby their interests are indeed adequately recognized in the selection of a leader.
So what you are pointing to is the fact that we have fallen down on the job of educating Americans about the logic and the reasoning of their constitutional system.
Can I
If
you right there,
they
David?
don't understand that, then of
David?
course they might be unhappy with the results. But unhappiness with the results cannot be the test of whether the system is defensible or not. Reason, constitutional reason, and the reasoning behind the Constitution, which I hope was good reasoning, should guide us, not the mere wishes of the people.
David, you're arguing that
We need to create a people capable of making those kinds of judgments, knowing when to be upset and when not to be upset, what to accept and what not to accept, when not doing a good job.
I'm upset. You argue as if the Constitution of 1787 was written in stone. It has been modified significantly over the years, particularly in the area of democratizing further the country, allowing more people to participate in the process. Now you're saying, well, now that people are participating in the process, their wishes, the wishes of a majority, should not be recognized because the founders didn't see that possibility. They decided upon an electoral college which denied the people to have that impact. For I think, very selfish reasons, very limited reasons of view at that time. They were fearful of mob rule. They were fearful of the people taking over, whereas they thought that the best educated, the best economically, are in a better position to decide who should govern in the country. The electoral system has broken down. The electors that they wanted have not been produced. Okay, we are getting to the point now where our election system is running the risk of being rejected by the people if indeed the will of the majority is ignored.
Ron, we're going to have to let people jump in here. I am making an argument based on an appeal to reason. I am not making an argument based on an appeal strictly to the Constitution. I am making an argument based on an appeal to reason. And appeals to reason, I hope, were good in the 18th century, good in the 19th century, good in the 20th century, and good in the 21st century. All I'm inviting is a response to that argument based on reason that is rooted in that appeal to culture and cultural consideration. What I want to see is a response to that argument. Can you make an argument that the national government can in fact nurture the kinds of citizens you want better than local governments, better than our communities? Because what you're pushing for is the destruction of the federative system and the substitution of a national republic. That's the argument you need to address. That is the fundamental argument. The kind of people you want. What kind of people do you want in this country of yours? I talk to you about the kind of people I want. And it goes beyond consent.
David, I think we want the same thing, but I think you give too much credit to the federal system to encompass all aspects of political life in this country. I'm talking about making a very significant change that indeed will enhance the obligation that people feel towards their government. If indeed they see that a majority vote will carry weight in the selection of a national president. I'm in favor of all the things that you're doing. I just think with regard to the Electoral College, it is outmoded, outdated, and needs to be dismissed.
All right. Well, and you've heard my argument that you are taking a very important leg out from underneath the federal system. You are going to weaken that system, and it won't do what you apparently think it will still do. But I think we need to get to questions.
Thank you both, gentlemen. That was wonderful. I am absolutely confident that we've given the folks what they have paid for, and I'm also confident.
You mean they paid for this?
Well, absolutely.
We get paid.
Absolutely. We'll make our annual fund goal this year and then some. I would also say I am confident that the level of discourse this evening will be much more thoughtful than the debate that we'll watch tomorrow night. With that being said, let me go to some questions. The first question comes from Tuck Schumack, one of our members of the Wilson Center Board of Advisors. This question goes to Dr. Heinemann. It's a long one, so bear with me. The premise of your argument seems to be that the Electoral College does not produce the best president, and that the one with the most votes is the appropriate outcome. He cites Maine, where the state legislature, after enduring 2 terms of the governor, according to the majority of the party's subjective opinion, wasn't the best candidate for governor, and they then enacted ranked choice voting. In the following congressional election, the incumbent congressman in the 2nd congressional district received the most votes on election day, but was determined to lead the loser in the days following after ranked choice was factored into the results. Would you agree that ranked choice voting is undemocratic by your arguments?
I didn't quite understand the entirety of the question. Were you referring to the Maine, Nebraska changes to the Electoral College system?
So Tuck provided an argument for in Maine they had a ranked choice election for Congress, and as a result of that, someone was elected to Congress with fewer votes. And so he essentially said, "Would you be okay with that as an outcome? Is that an undemocratic process in your eyes?"
Again, the voice is not coming through very clear. With regard to the proportional system of election that I referred to in Maine and Nebraska, that solves some of the problem, but it does not solve the issue of the majority rule. It doesn't solve the difference of the winner-take-all problem with regard to the Electoral College, in that half the people's vote are essentially dismissed because they are not considered in the final vote of the Electoral College.
Okay. This comes from our weak professor, John Hiller. When the founders did their historical survey of Democratic and Republican experiments throughout history to that point, what worried them about pure democracies that led them to want Republican features in our system of government? Let's let Dr. Marion answer that.
Okay, well, that's a biggie. That could take me about this much time, and we have this much time to respond to. Let's understand that the founders, who are really taking a beating these days, a real big beating these days, did believe in government based on consent. They did believe that legitimate government has to be a government rooted in the consent of the people, but it has to be more than that. Mere consent is not sufficient. What worried them? What worried them was that the demos, the people, were human beings. And human beings have passions, and they have emotions. And so they wanted something special in America. They really did want a quality republic. Look what Madison has to say about the decision to have an appointed judiciary rather than an elected judiciary. It was all about having a quality judiciary. And he was convinced that an appointed judiciary would be better for a quality democracy, republic, than an elected judiciary. It was all about getting quality. So how do you have democracy, the sovereignty of the people, and quality? And the response was, we need to create a really complicated system here with a whole lot of moving parts. A certain kind of Senate, a certain kind of House, a certain kind of judiciary, a federalistic system, a lot of moving parts. One big part was figuring out how to get human beings not to behave in a factious way, or at least to diminish the ill effects of their factious impulses. And so they went with a large republic, and they went with a representative system. So what was the teaching from antiquity? It's tough to have a decent and competent democracy, but they didn't give up. But they also didn't create a pure democracy, and they didn't believe that consent would be enough. And so we don't elect our judiciary. And I think many, many Americans agree that it probably makes sense to have an appointed judiciary rather than an elected judiciary, even though some states have elected judges. There's much more to add to what I have said. But again, let me just reinforce one point. This is a very complicated system. It has a whole lot of moving parts, and it requires good judgment from everyone. It requires a certain kind of Senate and senators who exercise good judgment, a certain kind of judiciary and judges who exercise good judgment, a certain kind of electorate and electors, voters who exercise good judgment. And that gets back to my defense of the Electoral College. How do you get people? How do you nurture a people who will be up to the job of self-government, up to exercising good judgment? That isn't just going to happen by chance. It's going to happen only with a lot of effort. And Madison and the founders decided that it was only going to happen in a very complicated system that divides power in many different ways and leaves some significant power to the states and localities. And statements matter. Getting rid of the Electoral College will send a statement that a national republic is okay, and a federal republic is not necessarily needed in order to have a quality democracy. Well, enough from me.
Yeah, let me briefly answer that question. There's no reason why a national election is going to intrude on the operation of a federal system in terms of the Congress and the judicial system. The Electoral College that we have today is far different from that designed by the founders. I mean, they were talking about the electors being men of great repute, men of great knowledge, great wisdom, great political instincts. That's not who our electors are today. And there are many other changes that have taken place with the Electoral College in terms of the way the states get involved in the selection of electors. So I believe that the system is weak with regard to our Electoral College and the election of our national president, but that does not intrude on the way in which the other parts of our federal system operate.
Okay, I'll ask some very questions that might be able to be answered a little bit more quickly. This question is for Dr. Heinemann. How would you amend the Constitution to correct for the current weaknesses in your eyes?
To what, excuse me?
How would you amend the Constitution to correct the issues with the Electoral College in your view?
Yeah, you would add an amendment to the Constitution that would override the 12th Amendment, which amended the way in which a president is selected in 1800, a change already incorporated at that early time. You just pass an amendment to the Constitution. It has been proposed many times before. It came very close to passage in 1969-70, when the House did indeed pass a direct popular election. with 50% of the vote. That was amended to drop down to 45%, I believe. The Senate, however, rejected that amendment, and that's where it sits today.
What would it look like, Dr. Heinemann?
It was a very simple amendment in terms of the way in which the vote would be totaled and who would win the election, you know, the percentage that would be necessary for a victor to win, and if he didn't get that certain percentage, then you had a runoff operation. Very simple.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
Ron, I take it that you will concede that with that system, we would almost always have runoff elections. It would be extremely, extremely unlikely that we would have anyone meet that threshold in a single election, simply because the American people would know about the possibility of a runoff. And so you would begin to have all of the special interest parties appear and get votes during the first election, denying very likely any candidate, whatever the minimum, whether it's 45% or even 40% that you would require for that person to become president. Do you agree?
No, the political parties and the people will coalesce around likely victors. So you will not have an excess number of people running for the office. But if you look at the history of the voting for the president, you have if you allow a limit of or a requirement of 45% election, then all elected presidents have reached that level, but for 5. Only 5 other elections have the elected president fallen short of the 45%. And I would think that a choice of 45% would clearly be enough to assuage the voters in accepting the majority vote.
I would bet the ranch that if we go to that system, that you are going to have abortion parties, environment parties, tax parties, property right parties, all kinds of parties that are going to appear, and they are going to campaign, and they are going to be divisive, and factious impulses are going to be incentivized by your proposal, because Americans will know that they will have that next election where then they can perhaps vote for a Biden or a Gore or a Bush or a Clinton. But in that initial election, they will have an opportunity, and many of them will use it to express their support for marginal interests, special interests, and divisive interests. And those are the kinds of things that the founders thought about when they arranged this very complex system of ours. Would we be incentivizing factious impulses or de-incentivizing factious impulses? And you're going to be incentivizing. Well, I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's a good one. Okay. This question is for Dr. Marion, and it comes from Professor Utzinger. He asks, why do we presume a smaller group is more educated and promotes the common national good better than the aggregate of the interest broadly of the people? The answer, it seems, is that the Electoral College presumes to know better than the people.
No, not at all. I never said that. What I said was that the Electoral College makes a statement about the importance of the states in our constitutional system at a time when all the cultural forces are pushing us in the direction of a national republic. The Electoral College reminds us in a dramatic way that states are important and we should consider states to be important. If we take that seriously and allow states to be important, then things will be permitted to go on within the states and in the localities that will be good for nurturing the kinds of citizens that we should want to have a decent nation, a quality republic. That's the point that I'm making, and that seems to be missed here, and I may not be making it very well. I am not saying that the judgment of the electors is necessarily better than the judgment of the people. I am making an argument, a cultural argument, based upon the preservation of the American federal system at a time when cultural forces are undermining that system. That is my.
You're essentially making an argument, David, that the minority has a greater knowledge of the system than the majority does. I would point out that a Gallup poll of some years ago found that the more educated a person is, the more likely he or she is to favor the abolition of the Electoral College.
I don't think I ever said what you said at the beginning. When did I ever say that, Ron? That a minority is brighter, more knowledgeable than the majority? Are you missing the argument that I'm making for the American federal system and the connection of the Electoral College to the preservation of a federative republic?
You talked about the role that the founders played in the establishment of the Electoral College, and they really disputed the education, the commitment of the majority of the people to select their own leaders. They designed a system whereby that was shared. And I'm saying it's now time to allow the majority of the population to make that decision.
Okay, you are absolutely missing the argument I'm making. I am making an argument based upon the reasoning that was used by the founders when thinking about what would be required to have a decent and competent democratic republic, what I've called a quality republic. What does that reasoning teach us about whether it makes sense to preserve the Electoral College or to go with the national vote, popular vote alternative?
I don't think it makes any sense.
Appealing to.
By the way, were the founders correct in terms of denying the right to vote to women? Were the founders correct in terms of perpetuating slavery? They were a group of very wise and brilliant men, but they made a lot of mistakes in the founding of the country. And
Ron, what did the founding fathers want for you? What does Madison tell you in Federalist 10 that he wants for you and all other Americans? And there is absolutely no reason to question the sincerity of what he says in Federalist Paper 10. What does he tell you that he wants for you? What drove him to construct the republic the way that it was constructed, to create the pieces that he created, to put them together the way that he put them together? What did he want for you as a human being? That's where you need to go. That's where we need to start the conversation.
I think he wanted individual liberty for all Americans, but he had a confined view of the extent of that liberty through an electoral college.
He actually has a better construction in Federalist 10 of what he wanted than that. And it's related to that. And, you know, it is so often misconstrued. How often do we hear scholars who should know better say that the founders were all about the protection of property rights? Madison doesn't say that in Federalist 10. Madison says that what he wants for you is an opportunity for you, Professor Ron Heinemann, to be all that you can be. Now, how do we construct a republic that gives you that opportunity, that situates you to be all that you can be? You may recall the language, to protect you in the full exercise of your faculties.
I agree wholeheartedly with you, David, but I don't think the Electoral College has anything to do with what Madison...
But the American federal system does, and you want to undo it.
I agree with the federal system, but I'm arguing that the Electoral College is not necessarily a major component of the federal system.
Well, we've gone round and round on this. There must be other questions.
Okay, a couple more. So this one is for you, Dr. Heinemann. This is from Will Hognell. Dr. Heinemann, who would administer a national election, number one, And wouldn't the candidates ignore smaller states and cater to population centers and coastal cities?
Who would administer the political system would be the same group of people that administer the political system or the electoral system today. And by the way, I believe that, today, the smaller states, people in the smaller states are essentially ignored because of the enormous attention paid to the larger states. And if you equalize the vote of every citizen, whether they be from Rhode Island or from California, then all citizens would be involved in the process. And they would be appealed to by the candidates running for election. Now, what the candidates running for election do, they go to the large states and they ignore all the small states because that's where the goodies are. Whereas if you give every citizen the same equal right to participate in the process, that is, the majority will win, then the candidates will likely go to all of the states, although acknowledging that, again, the larger states will continue to receive the greater interest from them. That's just the way, the nature of our population today.
Okay. Have one last question from, there are a number of other ones, but I am very aware of the time. This one comes from Paul Pisano, another member of our board of advisors. Paul, in his infinite wisdom, also asks a fairly long question, so bear with me. He writes, the only legitimate change to the Electoral College will have to be bipartisan. At this point in the current debate, it appears to be fueled by those losing, not accepting the results. But this isn't a trend beyond the Electoral College. Think about the gerrymandering debate across the country. One party pushes it when they're in power and dislikes it when they're out, and vice versa. How do we keep this type of approach out of the Electoral College issue to attract broad public support outside of changing the rules for a party's power for long-lasting support? And how do we make this issue bipartisan and supportive of broad public support?
Is that addressed to me?
You go for it.
You will get bipartisanship when the minority party that wins will suffer a defeat. Interestingly enough, the 5 elections that, or at least 4 of the 5 elections that have moved past the popular vote, the conservatives won those elections. If conservatives were to indeed lose an election via the Electoral College, then indeed they might find grounds for agreeing to some sort of change.
I don't think it's going to be all that difficult to sell to the American people, because the American people are being sold on the idea that legitimacy is the result of consent. We are seeing almost everyone these days play power politics, not constitutional politics. And so the American people are not going to have a hard time accepting the argument that consent confers legitimacy. I may have reversed that before. That's unfortunate. That is the product of poor civic education, that the American people don't know better. We, educators, should be doing a better job of instructing them so that they do know better, but we have fallen down in that job. I don't see that we're going to be doing a better job of it in the future. The culture is moving in Dr. Heinemann's direction. We are moving pell-mell in the direction of a national republic, pell-mell in the direction of embracing power politics over constitutional politics. So I unfortunately don't see that as a major problem. I think it's a major cultural problem for America. I don't think we're going to like what we're going to get, what we're going to have at the end of the day, but I think we're going to have it.
Dr. Heinemann, any last thoughts?
I think I've spoken my piece well enough. I appreciate this opportunity to debate this issue once more with Dr. Marion, who is a very, fine, combative debater. I would again like to recognize the pleasure I've had in speaking on this format to many of my former students in particular. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Well, Dr. Heinemann, Dr. Marion, thank you very much. You'll be pleased, but probably not surprised to know we set all types of records this evening. That was actually one of the reasons why we were having a little technical difficulties getting on. You know, since 1775, Hampden-Sydney has endeavored to educate good men and good citizens. Those very founders we talked so much about this evening also thought it would be wise to develop an institution that would educate the future leaders of our republic. And you two, as much as anyone else, with Dean Drew, General Wilson, countless other faculty and staff throughout the years, help perpetuate our democratic republic one student at a time. And this discussion this evening was just fantastic. You two, and what most importantly, what you do for our students, what you do for the, what you have done for those alums. I want you to think about all of those folks who are listening, all the ways they are supporting our civic institutions. You have a part in what they're doing. I want you to think about all the things you have done for our republic, and I just want to just express our gratitude for your time this evening and all that you've done in your storied careers here at Hampden-Sydney. Thanks to each and every one of you for joining us this evening. It's been a blast. Stick around. We will have a lot more of these to come. So take care. Thank you very much, and y'all have a great evening.
Ryan, let me applaud the Wilson Center for setting up these forums. I think this is a marvelous way of educating our alumni and others in the audience. And it says an awful lot about our commitment to the education of our young men.
Indeed, it hasn't wavered. Cameron Marshall and May Reed, as always, she makes everything good here happen at the Wilson Center. Those two deserve special thanks for setting this up. Thanks to both of you this evening.
Ron, I didn't say thank you for tolerating me this evening. I enjoyed being on the stage with you, not physically, but more or less virtually this evening. And I want to thank too the alumni and friends of the college who tuned in this evening. I hope that it was somewhat illuminating, somewhat instructive, and maybe somewhat entertaining as well. Thank you.
We knew it was going to be entertaining, Dr. Marion, when you pulled the sleeves, when you rolled the sleeves up. I'll take care. Thank you. Good night.